and are just some of the words that you may hear in today's podcast. Enjoy! Hello and welcome to the Perfect Information Podcast, a board game podcast dancing on the head of a pin with me, Ben Maddox, and the camel that got through the eye of the needle,
Yorgos Panagiotis.
Cool, blimey, Georgie.
Okay?
You look great today.
Yes, I do. It's the hat I'm wearing.
Did you get out of the bed on the sunny side?
I rolled off the sofa because we're not actually sleeping in the same bed now.
Why not?
Well,
no difficulties, I hope.
No. It's mostly just we're trying to minimize the danger of either of us getting sick and then, passing it on to the other, which means two sick parents at a house with two kids that need to go to kindergarten is really...
Georgios, you don't realise. You've been... No, I understand because everyone else has, right? You've been drawn in by the germ myth.
By the germ myth? Is
not that... the germ myth. It's not a Lord of the Rings monster, Georgios.
No.
It's a myth perpetrated...
by Germans.
Partly. Well, they started it.
Is that why they're called Germans?
That's right.
I see.
But the thing is, this idea that germs are the things that transport injuries, it's not, Georgios. No. What it is little monsters that bury into your sickness materials and they bring it out. What you need to do is you need to get a witch lady to come round and demonstrify your house. You can sleep next to your missus, you'll never catch it. Just demonstrify your house. Have you demonstified your house, Georgios?
Well, I hear what you're saying.
Right.
And it seems to me you're just using different words for germs and doctors and maybe cleaning ladies.
I spent €7,000.
That's more than I would have spent on anything.
On a witch lady to come round and demonstrify my house last year.
Oh, that's what they call it now.
Yeah. Do you know how many times? Yes, demonstrifying, Georgios. Nothing saucy or surreptitious or salacious here. Just demonstrifying. €7,000 I pay.
Was she an Eastern European lady?
She happened to be Eastern European, but that has nothing to do with it.
No, obviously not.
So so
you're not that lonely then?
She lit some lavender. She walked around.
Yes, obviously.
She went, jam, jum, baum.
I'm quite certain.
Booty, baum.
I'm quite certain you're doing a terribly racist impression of some Eastern European language there.
And do you know how many times I've been sick since she demonstified the house?
Are you asking me how many times you've been laid in bed?
Not like how many times I've got a cold or something like that. Do you know how many times?
Well, I'm usually not cold when I'm in bed.
Like only 3 times, George. Right. Only 3 times since then, right?
Amazing.
I mean, she did gob me off as well, but that was because she found me charming. It was nothing to do with the money I gave her.
I'm quite certain that I'm quite certain she started with, I don't usually do this.
And as a great segue into what we're talking about here, me and Georgios aren't agreeing. Georgios believes the sort of standard, myth that we've been fed that germs transmit disease, whereas I know the truth.
Or that, you can pay people to do things for you.
Indeed. And so we are divided on what we think.
It's a very German idea, yeah.
And what we're talking about today is divisiveness in the hobby. And are certain games inherently divisive? And where does divisiveness lie, Georgios?
Yeah, division or multiplication is what we're trying to say.
Exactly. And if you sleep with your Eastern European witch lady who comes and demonstifies your house, you might multiply quite extensively, Georgios, if you know what I mean. Nudge, nudge, wink, wink.
Do you really need a drum, like this drum roll at some point? They just go... Dum, dum, tsh.
I mean, I like to think of them as dad jokes, except you'd never say them to a kid because they're absolutely repellent jokes, Georgios.
Well, the great thing about kids is that they don't understand these jokes. I made such brilliant jokes about Heidegger and Nietzsche.
That's right.
To my son, and he just looks at me and goes,
"Who are they?"
Right, divisiveness then.
So, what we want to talk about is the divisiveness in the hobby, where it lies, and does it come from the games themselves? Okay, so to open up this as I like to define our terms because I'm a pretentious twat. I'm not actually an academic. I studied acting, so I didn't write a bloody essay in the 3 years it took me to do my degree, but I like to pretend. So where does divisiveness lie in the hobby for you?
I think in general, there's this odd tension between this underlying assumption of games being inclusive, open to everyone because they're accessible, because it almost doesn't matter which background you come from. You can sit down and play a game with others. So I think that's very much baked into the hobby itself. The idea of, everyone can do this. Everyone can enjoy this. The barriers that are there are details that can be easily overcome just by simply switching to a different game.
Well, it's less atomizing because, we always say this, right?
Right.
But you need to have people sat round a table in the same room as each other. So that's inherently less closed off than other sort of pursuits, right?
Right. I think the divisiveness, I could imagine, comes in two waves. One of them is just general dynamics of any larger body of people trying to sort of wall themselves off from those other guys. So, the classic distinction, of course, being Euro games and Ameritrash games.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of other games as well. There's the heavy board gamers as opposed to the light, fluffy, casual board gamers, whatever you want to call them. There's this idea of deep strategy on one hand and random nonsense on the other. Or dry cube pushing on one hand and fun and entertainment on the other. There are a lot of ways in which you can sort of draw arbitrary lines. And it does seem to me that occasionally, just because by nature of being human beings, we do fall into this trap. We do sort of wall ourselves off from certain types of players.
Well, two things first.
Right.
Are the lines arbitrary? Because it seems to me that you have certain things in a certain genre that you have one group of things that look like each other and another group of things that look like each other. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't suggest arbitrariness to me, right?
I think I'm using arbitrariness in the sense of we choose which lines we value and which lines we ignore. I think that's where the arbitrariness comes from.
Okay.
Basically, I don't know. I'm sure there are people I don't like to game with, but right now I can't really think of the kind of person I would. Oh, actually, no, I do remember people who I don't like to play with, and that's mainly highly competitive gamers to the point where the competition trumps every other social dimension of the game. These are basically the kind of gamers I don't really have a lot of connection with. And it's not so much that I look down on them or anything. It's just I've learned that I don't really enjoy myself in a group of these kind of gamers. Which, if they're a bunch of highly competitive gamers sitting down together to play a game like, Intrigue, one of the probably most spiteful games I've ever seen, then more power to them. I will just quietly leave and play something else.
So, divisiveness is characterized by disagreement.
Right.
And
no. Yes.
We're not doing that Monty Python thing, Georgios. I'm not ripping off John Cleese.
Well, yeah. Well, someone probably should. He's rich, right?
Oh, yeah. No, rip off in his artistic thing. I'd happily dox him and then take his money from his account. I was trying to be street there by using an internet term, Georgios.
Yeah, there's nothing street about the internet.
But, so, divisiveness is characterized by arguments. And arguments, by their very nature, are sort of fractious and unpleasant at times. Even if you're arguing about something that is seemingly unimportant. We live in a Western society lives in a permanent state of luxury. So we really, until Big Donny T came to power, we argued about basically facile shit because our lives were all right. Now we're heading into a Mad Max future. We might start arguing about things that have import. But where do these arguments come from? Are they born out of good intentions or bad intentions, would you say?
I'm not sure. I'm not entirely sure that intention has much to do with it. We talked about this earlier. You mentioned this idea of people being reactive. And I think this applies here. The idea that the situation, and for whatever reason, even if you can't articulate it, you react to it in a way that sort of puts up barriers. For whatever reason. It could be purely personal. You just don't like that person for various reasons. It could be tied to the game. That person acted in a way that really, really seemed to step over a line. It might be just pure vanity and self-serving, egotistical nonsense of, saying I'm obviously a better gamer because A, B, C, and D.
But is there not a sense of I'm defending the thing I love against the criticisms that it gets? And I only see, people are all sort of self-editing, and they take notice of things that they're sort of predisposed to take notice of. And there might just be a fact of, all I see is people slagging off this thing that I love. And they may not see the positive things because they don't have a particular mindset that day that looks for the positive, but they focus on the negative, and they say, no, I have to stand up. This is the thing I love, and this is why. And then that promotes responses. And especially when something is done out of passion, it can often be phrased in an inflammatory manner, right?
Right, yeah. No, I see that. But thinking back on conversations I've had, I noticed I felt that 80-90% of these sort of internal criticisms seem to be more or less friendly ribbing.
Right.
So basically, when I'm talking about some Eurogame being, a dry, soulless cube pusher, it's not a deep criticism of these genres of games, because I like them just as much as I like other games, but it's just sort of almost kind of an inside joke, because calling a Eurogame dry, soulless, cube pusher, pasted on themes, these are just, these common arguments that have been used and abused so much that they've almost lost all meaning. It's like, what is pasted on anymore? What's soulless even? Why is it, what's a cube pusher? What is it? I mean, these are nice images, but they don't actually carry any meaning, any additional insight, they don't add to a conversation about these games in any meaningful way. It's just, these they've become these hollow phrases that you just throw around because you're lazy. And, I think if there is this desire to defend things, it's, it's towards people who aren't in the hobby. That's the experience I've had. People looking at me funny is like, why do you play board games? I mean, isn't that like, do you sit down and just, compete and just, get mad at each other for rolling a 4 or something? Like these odd ideas of what playing board games regularly is like. It's like, are we sitting down quietly, just staring at the boards for hours and occasionally, pushing a meeple across a space and going, oh, I won. This idea that basically board games are very, very, what's the word I'm looking for? I mean, it's an argument I've made as well, but, I try to go, to reach it from a different angle. The idea that they are inherently dull, boring, and there's nothing in them that could appeal to somebody who's not a child anymore.
It's really interesting because you say this, that you see the divisiveness within and out of the hobby.
Right.
And I don't. I see, because I guess my life operates on 2 different sort of scales. My life operates within board gaming and out of board gaming. I have very much groups of people who aren't into games. And so when I'm with them, games aren't a consideration, and they're not a part of my life when I'm socializing with them, right? I see the divisiveness I think the divisiveness within gaming is almost a stamp of being in the hobby, because the arguments that are made. So if you take the classic division, right?
Right.
Which is Eurogame and Ameritrash.
Right.
And I think a lot of designers have been working, I don't think that's their intention, but through their work have been working to sweep that division away more and more.
I think to some extent it is their intention. I think to some extent, I think there are a lot of good things in both genres of games. I think the rigidity, the cleanliness of a good Euro game.
But they're not doing it to bring the 2 camps together. They're doing it because they're taking great mechanics from this kind of thing, great mechanics from this kind of thing, to the sort of overlay of politics that you lay on top of it is from the consumers, not from the designers, I would suggest.
I possibly, yeah.
But if you look at one of the classic sort of Eurotrash games, that combines them together, it's Chaos in the Old World.
Right, yeah.
Eric Lang is very good at this. But I think having these opinions that can cause, I mean, mostly it's ribbing, but you see people get legitimately angry over these sorts of things, right?
Yeah,
I mean, it's fucking insane, but nevertheless they do. Yeah. And I'm not alone in this. Sometimes when people just say, they dismiss something out of hand because of it's got on. So the classic Tom Vassell quote, which antagonizes me. I mean, only a little bit. I mean, I've got bigger fucking problems in my life, but nevertheless, it antagonizes me, is that, it's always got a miserable man from the Middle Ages on the box, right? Which was so boring. Right. As if the whole sweep of human history is just this boring thing that I have to wade through.
Oh, well.
I think it's so intellectually lazy, but there we are. You know, it's a stamp of being part of something, that you can opine on this, that you can have an opinion, that you can say, I prefer this because I know enough about this and this to know what I like.
Right.
In some ways.
But isn't it even a step further? I mean, we're not talking about I know what I like. It's this additional step of this is good and this is bad because I like this and I don't like that. And this is, I think, where tension and divisiveness can arise. If you're dealing, I mean,
we're not androids, right? So there is an instant.
No, we're iOSs.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There is a natural, it's a natural sort of human state, and our better selves try to rise above it, but it's a sort of natural instinct to say, well, if I like this and I don't like this, this is therefore superior to this. It's not a track.
That is intellectually lazy, but I see that.
No, it is intellectually lazy, but it's also instinctive.
Yeah.
I think it's a natural mode of thought that you go into, and you have to sort of clamber intellectually above it to try and be the bigger person. You know, most people aren't. So I like Eurogames. Therefore, I think, right. Okay. I'm going to put my cards on the table here, Georgios.
Board game reference. Well done.
Thank you. It's actually general parlance, more a sort of poker reference.
I was trying to sort of, give you some credibility as a board game aficionado and, knowledgeable person.
Georgios, I have no bloody credibility.
Yes, I know that, but the listeners may not.
I mean, look at me.
Well, again, the listeners can't.
I've got a silly floppy hair. I've got 3-day stubble that I constantly maintain as 3-day stubble. Well, I sit in cafes and write books, Georgios, that no one's ever going to fucking read, that are never going to get published. All I have now to do is get an Apple computer, and I am the worst Berlin stereotype you can imagine. But
you're probably the oldest millennial currently in Berlin, yeah.
Oh, come on now. You know that's not true. You know that's not true. Anyway, I would say if I had to be put in a camp, although I tend to play everything, if I had to be put into a camp, I would say I'm a Eurogamer, by and large.
I'm not sure we should talk about putting people in camps again. It's,
especially under the current situation, but nevertheless, a metaphorical camp of preference, Georgios.
Right.
If you were to put me into a metaphorical camp of preference, Georgios, I would say that I'm a Eurogamer by and large.
Right.
They're the things, that sort of puzzly, crunchy decision things where people don't tend to interfere, because the world bends me over and does things to me that, you have to pay Eastern European witch women 7,000 euros to do, right? So I like games.
Did you witchifying your room?
That's right, Georgios. Right. I like games to be
monsterfying. Anyway.
Yeah, that's what I called it.
Well done.
I like games where I can do my shit and not get interfered too much by other people. I played Terraforming Mars the other day, and there's these random cards where people get to fuck you, and I was so angry when they did it to me. So I would say I'm a Eurogamer. And part of that, why am I a Eurogamer? Not just simply because I enjoy Eurogames more. It's not just that. It's just, I do think as games, as works that are meant to elicit entertainment, I think they're constructed in a better way. It's not that I think people who play Ameritrash games are somehow inferior, but I do, to a degree, think the games are.
I think...
And I don't feel intellectually lazy because of that, because I've rationalized it quite a lot.
Yeah. I mean, what I appreciate about Eurogames is the rigidity, is the tightness of mechanics. It's why when I sit down to play a game that's allegedly a Eurogame and it has none of this rigidity, this tightness, this cleanliness, I get annoyed. I think I don't know if it's always been there and I've just, the last 1 or 2 years realized, sort of managed to articulate it, or if it's been a recent development, but I always look at these games as way of socially interacting with people. And this is basically the standard that I judge games on. This is what appeals to me. So there are Euro games where I feel the interaction that they create, the social interaction that they sort of evoke on top of the gameplay itself appeal to me. They're great. And there are games that do that on the Ameritrash side. And then on both sides, there are games where the social interaction does not appeal to me. So I find it difficult to sort of put myself in either of these camps because the things that define those camps aren't what I'm attracted to. I'm attracted sort of to the end result.
Right.
It's why
So you see them as experience generators as opposed to... Now this that's wrong, but you see the experience is your final goal as opposed to the mechanics of the game and appreciating the way it's cobbled together.
Oh yeah, definitely. I think I can still, like I said, I can appreciate a well put together game, but if the experience that follows is interchangeable, it's dull. I mean, I played Century Spice Road recently. I think it's a well put together game, but the experience it generates is a bit meh. I mean, it's not appealing enough to me to sort of go, all right, this is something I want in my collection. This is something I want to play again. It's just not that interesting to me. And it's sort of, it does feel too much like Splendor. And, it looks nice though. Whereas, I mean, well, the great example that I keep coming back to and you love to keep shitting on, is of course TI3, which I don't think is a particularly well put together game, but the experience it generates is amazing. It's just, to me, there's no game like it. There's nothing. I mean, I've played Eclipse. I will eventually play some of these other big space opera games, but it's such a huge difference in experience. I mean, even if Eclipse is a tighter game, if it's more focused, the mechanics are more interesting, less, cobbled together. It's the experience that, that results in playing a game of Eclipse is, to me, streets behind TI3.
So now I want to move on we've talked about the games to some degree. We've talked about... Now I want to ask one more question before I move on. There is this idea that Euro gamers are snobs. And if you look at the evidence where it's borne out, you could justifiably say so. I'm not sure I agree, but I mean, I'm sure you could. There is people who are far more intelligent than me could write an essay citing time after time after time where Eurogamers have demonstrated snobby behavior. Mm-hmm. Do you think there's something inherent in Eurogames themselves that elicits that behavior?
No, I don't think so. I think... I mean, before we recorded, we were talking about, general stuff, politics mostly. And we also came up with this idea of snobbery, the idea that the elite are snobs and we need to reject them. Not that I don't feel that way at all, but I do recognize that there's this general feeling in a lot of countries, especially in Europe, and I'm quite sure in the US as well, that the elites up there are snobs, they look down on us, and the phrase you used was, we will give them what for.
Well, it's a definition of... The problem is when you have a political class, right? Inevitably, they're going to be a separate class from the rest of us.
Right.
And whether they are snobs or not, when we see separation, especially when that separation is not only delineated by power, but also money, we graft things onto them that we assume about rich, powerful people, right? Sure.
I mean, before we veer off into politics too much, going back to this idea of Eurogamers being snobs, I think there's a similar kind of irrationality to sort of vilifying people who enjoy Eurogames as snobs. It sort of took off a life of its own. I'm sure there have been people who've been awful snobs about Eurogames. I have no question about it. I have no question. There is no question.
That's English, Georgios.
Excellent. These people exist. The question is whether these experiences, especially when they're documented online somewhere, sort of start having a life of their own, start becoming this sort of representative behavior for a certain group of people that we apparently are just now figuring out exists. So if you're more or less new to the hobby, trying to figure your way around, and you hear, all right, they're Eurogamers, and the first thing you hear about from various sources is that they're snobs, that they're somehow looking down on people that don't like their games. It just becomes this myth that propagates itself. It just keeps going, and luckily I feel it hasn't gotten worse, unlike, say, similar dynamics in real life. But I could see, I mean, if somebody were really if there were a group of people who would really push towards vilifying Eurogamers, I think we'd have a similar situation.
I think it's a misconception. Right. I think it's a misinterpretation. And I think it's born out of the little homunculi that live in our head that make us insecure.
Yes, so weird ideas about biology.
No, it's true, Georgios. Our thinking is done for us by an homunculus who lives in our head.
You do know that Men in Black is not a documentary, right?
Yeah, that's what they'll have you believe, Georgios. You should go on that. You should go to the brilliant website. It's called Infowars.com, Georgios. Right, yeah. Go on Infowars. There you'll learn the truth, love. There you'll learn the bloody truth. That's Alex true. Jones. Anyway.
Performance artist, obviously.
No, soothsayer, Georgios.
Well, publicly he is a performance artist now.
Well, so that's what his lawyer said, but nevertheless. Anyway, so often I think it's born out of a sort of game night politics, right? Mm-hmm. In that you'll have one table of people playing Trajan. Then you'll have a table of people playing the Resistance.
Right.
One game elicits a certain sort of volume of reaction, and another game elicits a sort of another volume of reaction, right? And often
actual volume.
Right, indeed. And so I assume at some point the people playing Resistance will turn round after something's happened, and they'll turn around and they'll look at the group of Eurogame players, and they'll see one of them look at the table looking like they're sucking lemons, right?
Right.
And what they will assume, because of the little homunculi that live in our head, is, oh, look at them looking down on us. Because they look over at the table as to say, look at you. But actually, having had experience with this, it's not what it is, Georgios. What it is if you're in a room playing Trajan or you're playing the Colonists, something heavy and thinky, and then there's people playing the Resistance at a table in the same room, and they shout, you look over, and it's not that, oh, look at those idiots playing their idiot game. It's just, could you be quiet for a second? I'm trying to concentrate and I can't concentrate with you shouting. And that's what it is, because I think games require, they have different demands and they don't sit very well in the same room, especially if you have high ceilings and it's very echoey. Right. Everything is amplified, right?
I think a lot of it comes down to subjective experience, because I've had similar experience with something you described, on a different game night I used to frequent more often. With two tables in one room, one larger, one smaller, and there were a few times where you had a boisterous table and a quiet table, and my experience was never that the quiet table would look down on the loud table. It was more like the loud table looking over and feeling sorry for them because, I don't think they're having a lot of fun, and it's not even like. It's not mean-spirited. It's like sympathetic. It's like, are you not having fun over there? And then they need to say, no, this is fun, but it's hard.
I love those pictures. You always see those pictures at conventions.
Yeah.
And it's always people sat around at a table and they always look like they're frightfully bored, right?
Yeah.
And they're not. They're just concentrating. Unfortunately, concentration doesn't come over in a photo particularly well, right?
Yeah.
You always look bored. Board games are terrible. The games themselves and the components, and especially since they've improved and camera phones have improved, they're wonderful things to photograph.
Oh, yeah.
But the people playing them, especially if you're playing a thinky game, the amount of pictures I've seen recently of people playing Terraforming Mars who look like they're about to commit Harry-Kiri, you know what I mean? Is incredible. And not been loving it, but it's...
No. I think, again, this is this discrepancy between what we see and what we experience. And it's obvious that a loud table playing the Resistance and laughing, or One-Eyed Ultimate Werewolf and just, talking gibberish and screaming in enjoyment of the game, there's no doubt that they're having fun.
Right.
And my point was basically, it really comes down to the perspective you're experiencing the situation from.
If you see someone looking at you as if they're sucking a lemon...
Right.
you might assume that they're looking down on you for what you're doing. Often it's not that. What I'm trying to say, often it's not that. It's just like, can you just give me 2 seconds to concentrate, please?
Exactly. Yeah. Or, the other way around, they're miserable and are envious of the game the other table's playing. So I think this is weird. I think the idea of, there's this specter of division that's, I think, not really born out of the games or even of the genres. It's a thing just people like to do for whatever reason. They might feel better in a clearly defined group, being not part of the huge sea of gamers, but part of the slightly smaller sea of a certain type of gamers. I have to admit, I'm not entirely sure why that would appeal, but if that's what people feel.
Social deduction games are like cigarettes. The thing is, if one person's smoking in a room, everyone's smoking, right? If one group are playing a social deduction game in a room, everyone's playing it because you just can't avoid it. Those games elicit volume in a way that other games don't. Okay, I want to move on to another point now, which is a slightly broader, more general point, sort of about society and about games. I think you would agree with me that the hobby is expanding.
All right, maybe.
More people are getting into it, right?
Yes.
The market, the way they express this is always through money because it's a quantifiable way to express things. More games are selling every year. More games are being produced every year. Therefore, more people, you assume, must be buying them, right? Apart from like super nerds who buy 27 copies of the same game. I'm sure that exists too.
Well, no, but I'm quite certain. I do wonder to what extent these increased numbers are by people who are just now discovering the hobbyist side and just on this buying spree. That I think a lot of episodes ago we talked about this evolution of being in the hobby where you start off and excited, and then you have this time span where you buy lots and lots.
You eat everything until you realize, oh no, Italian food's what I like the most. So I'll just have Italian.
So basically, even if it's just a small, comparatively small number of new gamers, if all of them decide to buy 40 games this year, the numbers are going to skyrocket.
So my question is, with the influx of people coming in, it's going to be people of different ages, different stripes, different creeds, different colors, different religions, that's what creeds are, different political persuasions, all of that sort of stuff. And when large groups of people who disagree with each other on sort of central tenets of human existence, what should be done with the economy, what should be done with the health service, what should be done with education, what should
obviously privatize it, because privatization has been the answer to everything. And
clearly works brilliantly well. Look at the British rail system. So inevitably, when people disagree about fundamental things, these disagreements tend to be more vociferous and about non-fundamental things. And so with all of these people coming in who have different ideas, do you think board games can be a cure for that kind of division? Or will we see the Conservative Board Game Association of West Yorkshire? Do you think that's going to happen? Or can board games a panacea for that?
I have to admit, I'm not that involved in the football fan scene. I can imagine, though, that football being so broadly appealing to people, mostly men, I believe, but I might be wrong, would have the same fractures. That would have the same teams and groups, and maybe you might be more involved with sports like that. Are there divisions? Is there a conservative wing of Liverpool fans?
Well, this is really interesting because within clubs have an identity. I mean, this is far stronger in Europe, especially in Italy, where you have a lot of sort of communist, socialist clubs and fascist clubs, right? And they're never going to get along with each other. But actually sport, what's really interesting is if you go to a football ground. So I'm a Liverpool fan, and and Liverpool went through a lot of economic privation in the 1980s under Thatcher, right? And there was a famous drama called GBH, Mm-hmm. And it was set in Liverpool, and most of the people were working class and unemployed. And there was a very famous character played by Jim Broadbent, whose catchphrase was "Giz a job, giz a job." He'd go around and he'd ask everyone, right? And so there was this myth perpetrated that Liverpool was this incredibly deprived area of the country. And and Liverpool's theme is "You'll never walk alone. Walk on with hope in your heart, and you'll never walk alone." And still to this day in football grounds, opposition football fans will sing, sign on with hope in your heart, and you'll never get a job," even though Liverpool has been completely regenerated and is an area of relative wealth now. And so in those sort of arbitrary divisions of clubs, there is a lot of a lot of friction and a lot of argument. Yet, I was listening to a podcast yesterday, and there's a club called Leyton Orient who have been in the Football League for 120 years. And through bad ownership, they got relegated out of the Football League this year for the first time in their history. And this guy was talking about the problems they've had and trying to raise money. And what was really interesting is he said, when it comes to this, when it's this serious, when it's a question of our club dying, whether you like football or not, football clubs are repositories of cultural heritage. He said, all of these people who, from week to week, standing opposite on us at the terrace would call us cunts and threaten to beat us up.
Oh yeah, I remember the British football culture being well known for its pacifism and its comparatively measured response to everything.
But under these crisis times, all of these people who previously would have been enemies came together. They gave us money. They helped. They staged protests at their own grounds when we weren't playing there. There was nothing to do with us. And the sort of community of that brings people together in bad times. It's only in good times, when people have the luxury to be assholes to each other, that they do.
Right.
And do you think that
excellent.
We come back to board gaming, but do you think board gaming has the potential to bring? I think there are certain people who hold certain beliefs, and I think on both sides of the spectrum, that are sort of unrescuable to some degree for whatever reason. But I think the majority of us live, whatever part of the spectrum we live on, there's a deficit of information which makes us believe that other people are monsters. Mm-hmm. Do you think board gamers can bring us together and maybe not change our political beliefs, but at least sit, the conservative Baptist Christian opposite the atheist hipster metropolitan and aid understanding?
No.
Brilliant.
Yeah. No, I think it's an appealing idea. It's a very affirming idea. It's a positive idea. But I also think that people compartmentalize these things very strongly. They do not. If I sit down at a table with other gamers, they do not. In this moment, they do not exist as people with political opinions. They don't exist as people of a certain faith. They don't exist as people of a certain economic background. They're just a person. And I have yet to find a game that actually makes us explore these individual backgrounds. I've yet to play a game where I learn about these beliefs, or where I'm led to, so I'm looking for, find similarities between oppositions which I might not have thought of before.
But no, I mean, the thing is, because ideas are ideas, and often they're ideas are fermented in opposition to other ideas. Ideas are very hard to reconcile with each other sometimes.
Yeah, very Foucault, but yeah.
But people are very easy to reconcile with each other, right? So, and as an example, I play on a regular basis with a Republican, an American Republican.
Really?
He's not a Trumpite, because, I mean, American Republicanism has been redefined by Donny T, right? Yeah. But he's a Republican.
Right.
And I would never have been brought into his purview if it wasn't for games.
Right, yeah.
And while I vociferously disagree with him politically, I think he's wrong. Sitting around a table with him and chatting to him about things that aren't politics, and this is this is a very easy and obviously very sort of, what's the word I'm looking for?
Boobies.
I'm always looking for those, but a very sort of obvious thing to say and quite trite, but I feel at the moment in our society we forget it a lot, is that regardless of whether he believes in his political system that I think is antithetical to a well-running world, mostly we agree on things. Right. And he's a decent lad. I just think he's misguided. And I wouldn't have met him if it wasn't for board games. And so I think it's interesting, and I think you're right. I'm maybe positing a world that doesn't exist. But I would like to think that we're able, through this hobby that we do, to be less atomized within our political ghettos.
Right. I think it's, like I said, I think it's possible. I think you can use a shared board game experience as the foundation of learning more about the people you play with, as a foundation of engaging with people you would otherwise not meet or engage with. It is possible. I don't think it's inevitable. I don't think it's tied into playing a game together because, again, I believe people compartmentalize when they play. And while they do recognize people as fully rounded human beings, at this moment, when they sit down to play, their primary identity is player. It is not any of the other markers that define them. It's not politics.
You don't chat to people while you're playing games?
Of course I chat with people, yes, but it's...
You don't discuss politics? You don't discuss the shit that's going on?
Not while we game, no. After the game, yes. Before the game, sure. While we game, we're focused on the game. I mean, if we start talking about politics while we game, it's usually because the game is really dull.
Right.
So basically, if we're invested in the game, we look at the game. At this moment, we are gamers. We're not Republicans or conservatives or lefties or whatever there is. We're gamers. And I think, yes, if the game ends and then you start chatting, yeah, of course, you end up talking about politics. I think my weekly gaming group, we always end up talking about politics because it's been on my mind for the last 8 months or so, and I can't not talk about my fears of the future.
Well, I mean, and this is it. I mean, the hope is, I think the hope is that through mediums other than, and I think games are positive in that part of the division in our society and part of the demonization of the other that exists on both sides is that people don't see each other anymore. People sit in rooms and they tap on keyboards, and the beauty of games, and I think we often talk about this, and especially, I see people as props to allow me to build my nice little farm with my sheep. I don't give a shit who they are. Whereas you have a different aspect on this. You like the experience. You like the above table stuff as much as the actual game, right? And the hope is something like this return to an analog, this return to people sitting in rooms together, and not just people from your particular political ghetto or your particular color ghetto or your particular affluent ghetto, will encourage maybe something that has never existed, a less fractionated society. And whether you think, and I see your expression, and you don't think so. No, you don't think it can work, but I think it's an aspiration to have, right?
Yeah, the reason I'm frowning is simply because I'm trying to think how gaming groups are usually put together. And I think it's, in my experience, the way I see it, it's one of two ways. You have the public gaming group, like the one you frequent on Thursdays. It's a more or less open public space where everyone can come in, sit down and play a game with people they've never met. And then you have the private gaming group, where people through various connections, friend of a friend of a friend of a friend, just shows up and eventually becomes part of your regular gaming group, which is what happened with my gaming group. And I think that when you're talking about public gaming groups, to a certain extent, this mixture is possible, but then you have to ask yourself, is this really something that will appeal to people of all stripes and all colors and all backgrounds to go to a public meeting space to play a board game? Or aren't people of certain backgrounds more inclined to start their private gaming group and thus not necessarily keeping to people like themselves, but at least, not being able to reach out to people far above or far away from the people usually surrounded by.
For sure. But I don't think... Now, I'm not saying you're asserting this. I'm just extracting an interpretation from it.
Right.
I don't think that's a political consideration. I think politics doesn't exist in whether you go to public gaming nights or private gaming nights.
No, not politics, but I mean, politics are invariably shaped by your background, socioeconomic, cultural, private, work. These are all factors that shape your political. So
I'll just ask you a question. Yeah. You're saying something here, and do you think people of a certain political stripe, and you don't have to delineate which here, right, but just do you think people of a certain political stripe are more inclined towards a public gaming group or a private gaming group? Is that what you're asserting?
No. Well, not political, no. Socioeconomic, yes. Political, no. I think people who have the flexibility, have the, not the wealth, but, the means to easily put together a game night at their own place, which is, fun, which is, inviting, and they have the connections of people just coming over and trying out this board game thing with them. There's a certain stripe of people who can do that. And I think by and large, people will prefer launching a private gaming group to a public one. And the reason why people go to a public one is because A, they can't start a private one yet for whatever reason. And B, they're looking for new people. They're recruiting new people, which is
grooming is the word I prefer, Georgios.
Okay. Which is quite literally what I did for a while. Where I would go to, way back then was role-playing conventions, and I was playing with all kinds of different people from Berlin mostly. And if there was somebody I thought, it works together. I like your ideas. I like the way you sort of contribute to the game. Are you interested in coming to my weekly or whatever weekly game night? That's usually what I did. That was the reason why I went out to public gaming nights. I had no other reason to do that.
You see, it's interesting. And we'll talk about this. I think this is a good topic to talk on another show, because I don't think it's a different thing, and we should end because we've been talking a long time.
Right. About football, but partly.
Well, you did ask me.
Yes, you did. And then you went on a tangent that took us, way into the Orient. Leighton Orient, in fact. The fact is, Georgios, I don't think on this you're right. And I would prefer to get into it when we have further time. Right.
Because I think motivations are different. But so I want you, listeners, because I think this is interesting, because I thought we brought up some really interesting points.
I didn't. I thought we talked nonsense.
Come onto the guild.
Yes.
4 3 4 4 3 4.
No.
What is it? I've forgotten.
2 3 4 8.
2 3 4 8. Come on the guild and tell us if we're talking bullshit. Tell us if you think board games can transcend politics. If you think human beings are terrible and they never will. Engage with us, because I think this is a really interesting topic. Where does the divisiveness lie in games?
Well, in my case, it lies with me, because when I find out I'm sitting down to play a game with a conservative, I'm probably likely to punch him in the face.
Our actions are like ships which we may watch set out to sea, and not know when or with what cargo they will return to port. Iris Murdoch said that. I'm TC Petty III, and this is Deep Design with TC Petty III. Board game ambassadors, or gaming with old people. A little less than 2 years ago, my Tuesday night gaming group saw a massive shift in attendance. We had recently been kicked from our comic book shop meeting place because of a combination of temporarily changing new comic release night to Tuesday and double scheduling Magic Night. As usual, Magic the Gathering fucking ruins everything. For a while, people visited our new location at a local church, but the heathenistic tendencies of our friendly crowd soon caused them to calmly decline invitation. Churches are a little awkward. What hastened this mass exodus with mixed results was that a bulletin was posted and people from the church started to come play games, and we were inundated with ladies of the 50 and 60 plus age variety. It was kind of like starting from scratch. The most hobby board game that any of these new attendees had played before was Bananagrams, so while I yearned for Panamax and Mombasa and Terra Mystica, I knew these dusty boxes were far-off fantasy lands that may never be explored again. I didn't give up. Instead, while my friend Rob brought new dazzling titles each week that went unplayed, I rubbed my greasy palms together, raided my board game collection, and we thrust upon them Colorado, Coup, Forbidden Island, Divinare, No Thanks, Anomia, Sushi Go, Lords of Waterdeep, Between Two Cities, and Quicks. And at least, while I lubricated their brain folds for deeper experiences, I didn't hate any of my time doing so. Except maybe for Sushi Go, which is the card game equivalent of being locked in a truck stop bathroom stall and having to choose which of 5 occupied glory holes to blow. When I first mentioned on Twitter my new dignified board game lady companions, people said, "That's cute," or "How nice of you," as if my actions were somehow chivalrous in nature, as if I had graciously donated my time to some Medicare-draining, Alzheimer-ridden sexagenarians with no amount of self-interest. Well, you social media peons were wrong. I created and pruned these elderly damsels, crafting them into evergreen playtesting topiaries. Through my willingness to teach with infinite levels of patience, I succeeded in cultivating, then siphoning the karmic essence from the marrow of their arthritic, cancerous old people bones. I forced them to playtest my games. But what does this story mean for you as a discerning, intelligent podcast listener that is also handsome and gorgeous with a genuine laugh that warms our hearts? What does being a patient ambassador for the hobby do for a budding game designer?
Pesky Outlanders.
We have a problem that is specific to board games. We're kind of a cult. No one who plays video games or sports, unless it's curling, worries about how their industry is perceived and needs to actively approach potential new players with patience and love. We do. It's really easy to just assume all board games are for children or are so complex that they're literally unapproachable unless you live in your mom's basement or have a degree in quantum mathematics. We know that's not the case, but them? They don't. Designers forget that they have a debt to the community and that by giving back to the community that birthed them, they build up consumer, designer, and playtester numbers. In other words, by being an ambassador for board gaming, you not only feed the cycle that eventually feeds you, you feed yourself on the cycle that you feed that feeds you. And that's a soup that eats like a meal.
The paradox of new gamers.
Here's the straight dope. If you can't gauge the intellectual and indoctrination level of your players, you are never going to receive proper feedback on your designs. And the only way to do so is by practicing doing so. There are some players that will never venture past the most entry-level gateway games. It could be attention span issues, an aggressive competitive nature that cannot be tempered, inability to equate brain activity with fun and not work, too much alcohol, too much weed, or maybe they just ain't smart. These playtesters aren't liabilities, they are fucking gold mines filled with diamonds. And here's why. Designers, artists, creators of any type are trapped, sometimes obliviously, in a time loop. Forced to perpetually steal from and repeatedly remake games that already exist. Sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse, and sometimes more obviously than other times. Set collection games, action selection or worker placement, area control, drafting, deck building, generic fantasy themes, farming games, sci-fi good versus evil, family games, gateway games, two-player battle card games, farming games, word games, did I say farming games? We repeat ourselves over and over again. Sure, there are new wide-eyed game designers that step in each year and unintentionally recreate existing games and proclaim them as new. But even established designers understand this cycle of interest. Game ambassadors need ambassador games. We crave new games. Old games get old. Our favorite games that once glitter-bombed their way into our memory now exist as inflated nostalgia, and during those rare times that we break them out, their stale reenactment of past joys crumbles soggily like an expired Triscuit. It reminds us that everything that we love will eventually bleed out and die, convulsing and gasping for breath before drifting into the endless, godless void. And just like we need new games that exist at the same intellectual level as older games, we desperately need gamers that cringe when they have to learn a new 15-minute card game after 8 p.m. on a Saturday night. Your games will not always change the world, the course of board game history, or other big words and stuff, whatever. Sometimes you just make a game and it's pretty good, I guess. So let me tell you a quick story about my favorite person, me. I recently had a chance to play Sagrada, which is a dice drafting, stained glass window building game that was just released, and like Karuba and Rolling Japan and Augustus and Quicks and countless roll and write games, it has this general pool mechanic where options are put in the middle available to all players, and players choose where to put these things on their own board. Central event, Players have their own simple puzzle to figure out. And with most of all these games, it's like playing bingo or the lottery. You buy your ticket and then hope it works out. Jot down a number, put a die into a spot based on some easy rules, simple, tactical, with risk management. I like these games, and I like Sagrada, but it's not better than the games I listed. It doesn't do anything new aside from drafting tons of dice, which people, well, honestly, absolutely love to do. So after I was done playing, I checked on Board Game Geek to see what other people thought. And the game has over 300 ratings, which is my personal metric for a legit rating, actually, and it is currently a 7.6, which in BGG terms is very, very solid. So why was my reaction a shrug of shoulders while the general gaming public just really enjoys this game? Because I'm wrong. That's why. TC, you're wrong. Say it out loud with me. TC, you're wrong. You have a strong case of the ennui. I'm looking at Sagrada from the position of a game designer that has played these types of games for years. I'm jaded. I'm thinking, how does it differ from other games in the genre? And it really doesn't. And I see the fundamental flaw of the last 2 rounds determining the entire game almost entirely by luck, and the starting windows appear to be all created and valued by feel. And the currency system in the game seems interesting at first, but is very unsatisfying when you have some pieces left over. They're useless at the end.
Stop.
You're wrong. It's got fantastic production values. It's got an interesting theme that automatically looks great and has broad appeal. The turns are smooth. The gameplay is fast. And because you're drafting dice, it feels like there's player interaction, even though it's minimal. And because the last few dice you draft matter so much and can cause you to win or lose the game, it's exciting to play all the way up until the end. And no one notices any of that shit you listed earlier. Sagrada is a great ambassador game. It's a solid, mechanically driven game that shows people what is fun about this hobby thing in like 30 minutes. We need games like this, even if high-class, esoteric, Canadian designer-hating douchebag game designers like me might raise their chin at you. And now, it's time to get practical. So how does being a gaming ambassador help you as a designer?
What? It helps you observe?
It helps you observe.
It helps you observe.
Being an ambassador of board gaming helps you recognize the cognitive abilities of players. It'll help you rethink happily grabbing that medium-weight Euro game in the middle of a room full of dazed, stoned, drunk 20-somethings. It lets you ask the right questions, understand body language and social cues. It helps you more fully understand what mechanics are difficult to convey. Robin Lees asked game designers on Twitter, what do you think is the most important question to ask playtesters in order to receive proper feedback? And the overwhelming response was that questions after and during the game are nowhere near as important as observing players during the game. Game designers tend to be mathematically inclined. Picking up nonverbal communication may be difficult for you and requires practice.
It helps you teach. I'm going to enunciate on purpose.
That's fine. You can say it however you want.
I can't even remember if I hate teaching board games anymore. Do I like it? I don't even know. I'm not sure if I've learned to enjoy it or if I've just done it so much that I recognize the result as positive. My belief is that if you ever think the thought, man, I hate teaching games, as a game designer, you haven't been designing games long enough. Teaching other games helps you teach your own games. It creates a natural rhythm and order. It helps you respond to stupid questions without losing your place. Just do it.
It helps you pitch.
You've directly seen the results. You've taught your game to idiots. The worst thing about pitching a game is when that nervousness creeps in, when you stutter out an explanation or laugh at awkward moments. Teaching your game a gazillion times beforehand not only shows that you've playtested the game several times, but the rehearsed order of words chunks that important informational order in your brain and allows your lips to move independently of your shaky cerebellum.
It helps build confidence.
You can talk, you can teach games, you can understand body language and social signals. Sometimes you'll fail. You'll put no thanks in front of a group of mildly inebriated gals and the game will flop. They will stare you down with their viciously female hate stares. Police sirens will be heard in the distance, dogs will bark, glass will break, but you know what? They can all go to hell. It happens. At least you tried. You assessed the situation, you were like a police officer responding to an emergency call and not just shooting the nearest black man in the area. You did your best.
Now you're willing to take control.
And like I said before,
It breeds new gamers.
gamers that are willing to play your terrible prototypes. They might even say nice things about them because they're naive and unskilled.
And it breeds karma.
Quid pro quo out the ass. You want people to buy your games? Teach them some games. If people generally enjoy your company, they generally avoid publicly stating random nasty things about your games. The reason I'm ranting about any of this is because I was able to see a tangible benefit to positive behavior that may not be obvious and may not even seem productive to many game designers. Because I take initiative here and am willing to teach and play games with patience, because of my presence in the Unpub community as both a designer and an organizer, and because you are for some reason listening to my nasally voice right now, I make more improved, well play-tested games. We need people to buy stuff. And if I tell you to do this, you might actually do it. You never know if the next person you teach a game will spend $500 on a pizza party for your next Kickstarter project. Sometimes suckers aren't born every minute. They're created.
Are you next? Well, pop behind the screen, off with the clothing, bend over and present yourself. Welcome to the guild. Oh,
very well. You're awake.
Jeebus, is that you?
Yes, I'm Jeebus.
Oh, Jeebus, I've been saved from my sins.
No, I'm just passing through. I still had some laundry.
Oh, it's you, Georgios, isn't it? I thought for a minute with the beard and the flouncy hair that I passed on to the other side.
No, you passed something.
Oh God, I did as well. Excuse me, would you give me a second behind the curtain, Georgios?
Sure. Why would we both be behind the curtain?
You don't want to watch me wipe my bum, do you?
Yeah, probably not. It's I'm sure, with all the limbs and movement and...
Oh, I tell you what. You're not here long, so I'll roll around in it for the 20 minutes you're here, and then then I'll get Nurse Cratchit to sort me out.
This is surprisingly close to my conversations with my son.
We call her Nurse Cratchit because she sounds like someone out of Charles Dickens, and she has the cruelty of that woman out of One Flew Over the Bloody Eagle's House.
Yes, the famous book and movie with
Jack Pickleman.
Yeah, also the Quiet Indian guy.
Yeah, what was he called? The Boss.
I don't know.
So it was Jack Pickleman and the Boss, wasn't it?
I have neither read nor seen any of these things.
And he had a Theresa May at the end, didn't he?
I think you might have fallen on your head.
Where he got lobotomized.
Ah, yes.
Oh my God, Georgios.
What?
I just made a rude comment about Theresa Maybe.
I don't think it's possible not to make a rude comment about her.
But I think the operation might have worked, Georgios.
Possibly, yeah.
You know what I mean? It was very, very fractious when they extracted my Tory. I've not seen so many pneumatic devices and tubes in my life.
No. Well, you're not many Doctor Who sets then.
That's right. And this is why I look so svelte now, and my body is so sculpted and beautiful.
Yeah, the drugs are not wearing off yet, are they?
Look at me, Georgios. I look
try
like
not to.
I look like that Charlie Hunnam fella.
Are you sure? I think he was quite attractive.
So for all of the listeners who haven't seen a picture of me in real life, just imagine Charlie Hunnam from Sons of Anarchy with his top off, looking all oil covered and muscular. That's basically how I look.
Well, why would you spend so much time figuring out how Charlie Hunnam looks with his shirt off?
Well, he only works with his shirt off, Georgios.
That is true.
It's unavoidable.
It is.
He is a hunk of masculinity, Georgios.
I guess so. I don't find him particularly masculine.
What, with all those muscles and that long blonde hair?
Well, first of all, he doesn't have as cool a mustache as I do.
That's true. Makes you look like Jeebus if you're coming down off narcotics.
Which is what Jeebus naturally, traditionally did.
Narcotics?
Yes.
A lot of poppies in the Middle Eastern region, Georgios.
A lot of uppers and downers.
A lot of poppies. Anyway, so what was the question?
The question was, that was a smooth segue, almost as smooth as me running into a wall.
That's right.
Yeah. The guild question was, what are you most excited about in the future of gaming?
Well, it's really interesting because I read through the replies when I was sat here in my hospital bed, Georgios, after I'd checked that all of my things were still present.
At various places all over your body, yeah.
As I was talking about my testicles, Georgios, they didn't. You asserted last week that they might chop off my testicle.
No, we averted that, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that, by the way. Yeah,
that's... it was a hard decision for me. It was. I really, really hesitated, but at the end,
why did you think if they did gender reassignment surgery that you might be able to have a couple of nights of amour with me, Georgios, as my lady form?
I was kind of hoping we would reduce the sausage fest that is this podcast.
Hello, Benjamina. I am Yorgos, and now I am going to romance you in the carnal arts. Was that what you were thinking?
That sounds like Antonio Banderas making fun of Antonio Banderas.
That was a Greek accent. That's a genuine Greek accent.
Which is what I said.
It was a Panopolese accent as opposed to you're from Athens or something, so you wouldn't know what it sounds like.
Yes, that is true. I wouldn't know what that sounds like.
But anyway, most of the responses were incredibly positive. There was one notable one that wasn't so positive, and we'll come to that later, Georgios.
Yes.
But a little guessing game for the listeners. See if you can guess who the negative response came from. Write it down on a piece of paper now, and see if you're right when we reveal it.
Yeah, good plan.
Anyway, first one was Erik Andersson Sundén. Is that my dirty monitor, or is there an accent on the E there?
No, there's an accent, I think. Is it a dot, maybe?
Erik Andersson Sundén. What does he say? All the way from the Isles of Sweden.
The islands?
Stockholm's all islands, isn't it?
Okay. I think even...
You're terrible at geography. You thought
worse.
You thought Costa Rica was an island, Georgios.
I thought Costa Rica was something you order at Costco.
Are you just island dyslexic? Is this what it is? So you're great at geography apart from the island bits.
My biggest weakness! That's not fair!
Okay, what does he say, Sundén?
Let me just quote, because I know I can read and I will like to convince the listeners that I can. I hope that the board game culture will be broadened and include more expressions. Hopefully, we will expand the current board games or entertainment movement to include other stories. I think that's fine. I think he goes on to expand this point, but I think the gist is there. Basically, the idea that we expand the hope that board games can expand from mere entertainment to aspiring to something more, artistic among other things, but just something that evokes different reactions from us as gamers.
Well, just before we turned on the recording equipment here in the hospital, we had a bit of argy-bargy with a nurse. She said it interrupts the EKG machines, but I don't care if someone dies. This is important, Georgios. You were saying that you have a bit of an issue.
I have?
With the word fun.
Yes, I have a bit of an issue.
And you had an abortive Twitter storm. You decided not to unleash. Explain to me your issue with the word fun, because I think this ties in.
I'm not sure it does, but basically, fun as a concept is usually something you fall back on trying to articulate your thoughts about a game. It's basically if you run out of things to say, if you run out of things to contribute to a discussion about a game, you talk about fun. Because fun is nebulous, fun is vague. Everyone seems to think they understand what fun is, even though it's tied to individual experience and actually not only the experience of the individual, but the actual experience of this group at this time with this game.
It's a magical overcoat, right? Fun?
More or less,
whoever wears it fits.
Yeah, it can. And then you can start arguments about what is and what isn't fun, which are completely nonsense. And it sort of keeps us from engaging with games as anything other than mere entertainment in a way. And so I do like the idea of board games broadening their appeal, board games establishing themselves as a medium with which we can have different experiences from just, a little bit of amusing diversion for an hour or two. And I think the groundwork is already there. You have like, for example, you have a lot of games that are very thinky, that are very much about the personal challenge. They're very much like we talked about a few minutes ago, where you sit down and you look like you're eating a lemon and you're not obviously having fun, even though
Few minutes ago, Georgios.
Yes. I'm a time traveler. What do you want from me?
Don't break the fourth wall, Georgios.
Anyway, way back then in a different dimension.
That's right. Sorry, did I derail you then?
Yes, you did.
Sorry.
Your stupid fourth wall breaking nonsense. There's no fourth wall.
But I thought what you were saying is essentially, there's just this trend of just describing them as entertainment, which renders them facile, right?
Yes, basically they are facile. And the idea that we can expand, the board games might be able to expand to provide experiences that are more heartfelt even, or even might encourage us to think about things, might just give us something that is more than just, as I said, diversion for an hour or two. I think that would be great. I think I'd love for that to happen. I don't know if it will. I'm not entirely sure how to get there. Because at the end of the day, board games, other than being a cultural enterprise and an artistic enterprise, they're also a business enterprise. You have to sell these things. And in order to sell them, they need to be presented in a way that is appealing. And much like in movies, it's kind of difficult to make a 2-hour epic about the sufferings of I don't know, Ashkenazi Indians in North America. No, wait.
Ashkenazi Jews, Georgios.
Not Indians.
In North America, though, that works. I assume there's Ashkenazi Jews in North America.
Probably. Yeah, no, I'm mixing up with the X-Files again. I'm so useless at geography.
But the point is, I mean, I think board games are uniquely positioned to transport these sort of non-commercial terms in that, or especially with Kickstarter, board games in comparison to other forms of art are actually relatively inexpensive to produce. And if there came a time where there was a sort of, and this hasn't happened yet, but a philanthropist who said, okay, you're doing this game, I'll bankroll your game.
Right.
And just so it gets out there, I think board games are incredibly ripe for that to happen because they're in there sort of as an art form. And there are certain people and people who contribute to this guild who don't like games to be talked about as art, but it's unavoidable, Isaac. And so it's unavoidable that they are, and that I value them as that. We should, the way we talk about them should evolve. We should stop talking about them just as fun, because fun is too nebulous. Part of being part of the hobby is talking about the games.
Right, yeah.
Not as much as playing them, but certainly it's a significant part, right?
Oh yeah, I think this is what actually, what sort of differentiates you from just somebody who occasionally plays a board game to somebody who loves the hobby. The idea that you want to enter some sort of dialogue about games. You're interested in what they do and how they do it. And I think I'm not 100% behind the idea of board games as art as of right now. Right. I think they have the potential to establish themselves as an art form that is uniquely board gamey.
But I think there are certain games that really encapsulate that.
Yeah, but that was just a sideline. We can turn to it later. No, my main argument was basically that right now I think they're much more a cultural artifact and a cultural engine, because we're creating these small pockets of shared experience between players. This is part of why I'm so invested into separating games by the experience they provide, because that's, I think, the most interesting and engaging aspect of board games. How do we engage each other? I mean, there's a huge difference between playing a game of Pandemic and playing a game of Diplomacy. There's a fundamental difference in how we relate to each other. There's a fundamental difference in the kind of emotions these games evoke, and there's a huge difference in the experience and the shared experience and the memories that are created in that way. Essentially, these are the bits and pieces that make up who we are and how we see the world. It's the shared experience that make us realize what we share with other people. It makes us realize that we're not so different in certain ways. Again, very funny compared to what I might have said in another dimension. But this is why I think board games have a lot of potential to really expand on this aspect of what they do. There's a lot of room to develop the different kind of experience the board game can engage. And I think, and this is basically how I read Eric's comment, not so much stories they tell, but experiences they create. Right. And of course, stories are the way we sort of mentally grasp what happens. It's the story that we experience, even though it's the experience that we feel.
And how these map on to other things that we like, and how they differ from other things that we like, right?
I think these are some of the most interesting. This is an untapped potential of what board games can do. And I would love for the future of board games to tap that potential.
Tap that.
You'd
like board games to tap that, is what you're trying to say. Okay, let's go to Ivor Bollockov, whose name is O'Bollocks. And He's talking about designers and how designers, when they inevitably become professional, will suck the life out of their designs.
More homogeneous and boring is how he phrased it.
And do you think that's true? Do you think professionalism of the hobby, the inevitable professionalism, Eric Lang is not going to be the first sort of big-name in-house designer that a company leverages. Do you think that inevitably will lead to beige?
I think the risk is there, yes. I think it is possible. But it will really come down to, and again I make an economic argument, it will really come down to whether you have the companies behind those designers hedging their bets, playing it safe, the way that, say, Hollywood plays it safe with a lot of the movies they put out, or whether we are still in this phase, even as it gets more professional, where there's enough room for risky new ideas, where there's enough room for companies putting out games that are different. I mean, right now you have something, because I've played it a while back, you have Matago, who apparently are not part of the Asmodee family. It's a mistake I made. Who puts out quite different games each year. I mean, they're not... I mean, if you look at Cyclades, Kemet and Inish, they're not fundamentally different, but they're different enough from one another that you do feel, there's a certain risk involved. I mean, just the art direction of Inish drew a lot of attention, both positive and negative. And a game like Captain Sonar, I mean, the closest analog would maybe be Space Cadets Dice Duel, but even that is different enough. I think these are still games where companies do take risks, and I don't think Matago is that small and tiny a company that you think, oh, no, these are just upstarts. They're just idealists that can't really see the risks they're actually taking. I think they've been long enough in this industry to know what they're doing, and they're still willing to take risks. And I think this sense of entrepreneurship is still alive in board gaming. I think there's still enough people who are willing to take risks with games, even if a company like Simon have their new Kickstarter games down almost to a science.
Well, the point is, isn't it, decadence leads to stagnation. So when things are on a low curve, they tend to not have invention. So Tony Boydell talks about the 70s with Waddingtons and Spears having in-house designers and refusing unsolicited submissions. But that's at a time when no one's playing board games.
Right.
And so inevitably a decayed industry is going to have decayed products at the moment, and especially into the future, with the constant influx of new, fresh people with new, fresh ideas.
Right.
Even if it's not coming from the big companies, there will still be innovation, and no industry suffers from being popular.
All right. Now, I think the interesting thing is, though, I think right now it's I get the impression that companies still believe that the next pandemic, the next Dominion, the next Ticket to Ride is out there.
For sure.
There's a huge new thing is going to show up any day now. This year, maybe next year, but there'll be another huge surge, another fresh idea pushing the game into maybe not completely new direction, but pushing it into a different direction that it's been on for the last year, for example. And I think as long as companies, as long as people putting down the money to produce these games still believe that, I think we don't run the risk of turning beige.
I mean, it's really interesting. I listened to the Ludology podcast, and Mike Fitzgerald was talking about how it's changed in 10 years.
All right, yeah.
In that when you pitch a game 10 years ago, they'd say, what is it like? We need to put, this is a game like Dominion on the box.
Right.
And if you tell us it's like Dominion or like Catan, they're more inclined to sign it. Whereas now, people are saying, what's unique, what's new? Right. And this is not just little indie companies. This is throughout the industry. Yeah. So at the moment, that's a positive indication that people are looking for innovation, looking for new things, looking for the industry to grow. And it doesn't look like decaying anytime soon.
But, I think the worry that Ivor voice was that, will this still be the case in 2, 4, 5 years from now? Will we have more entrenched huge companies carving up the market between themselves, and sort of pushing smaller and indie companies to the margins.
Professionalization never harms an industry. Professionalization offers freedom. Commodification maybe, but professionalization always improves things. When people have the money and the comfort to focus their whole energy upon that thing, it inevitably gets better. It can't not, right?
And this is actually a good way to sort of mention what Isaac Shalev said about this. He says, as more designers get to do this work full-time and professionally, I think we'll see even more ambitious games being attempted, sort of echoing your point.
Right.
And I'm not entirely sure about the ambition, but I do agree that if work in this industry stops being something you do on the side, stops being something you finance with your day job, then yes, I do think we'll see a more solid output, a more interesting output, because people suddenly are freer to pursue new ideas and different ideas. Again, whether they'll be more ambitious or whether they'll just be, designed for the market, I don't know. I think that will eventually come down to the people themselves.
Yeah, well, that's not to say games aren't great at the moment, but, the hope is that everything improves and we progress ad infinitum. So, Georgios, I'm going to do a bit of acting now.
Go on. But why would you do that? Do you have any sort of background in acting?
No, none at all. None at all. But,
So what you're saying is you're not skilled?
Well, the thing is, I've stopped being Tory and now I've gone more to the left. I'm more into the liberal arts. I'm thinking of becoming an improviser or something, Georgios.
That's a good plan. I think Starbucks is looking for one.
Yeah, I hear that's where a lot of improvisers work at Starbucks.
Yeah.
Anyway, so negative comment klaxon time. So, get your pieces of paper out. Did you guess? The negative comment came from his original perfect information, Chris, the rocket surgeon. I'm going to render him in a character.
Well done. And action.
I'm not sure. I'm really looking forward to anything. The further forward we've been going, the worse and worse the majority of the hotness games are becoming. You were talking about rising tides in the last show. I think he means rising sun. And I'm not quite sure that's the very best analogy. I'd be concerned... No, he wasn't. We were talking about rising tides.
You were, yeah.
I'd be concerned that we're seeing trickle-down economy starting to prove that it's a myth.
Oh, starting to prove?
Whilst the increase of the hobby has allowed so fan-fucking-tastic games to be created, it's like the divide between the games world's 1% and the rest is increasing. I don't understand these sentences. The latest games are full of plastic and boring choices and are getting more and more money and more attention, and the less the focus is falling on innovative design. People are being fed their Soylent Green and fucking loving it more than ever before by percentage of community. It doesn't really feel like progress to be getting some excellent games come out, but having to feel isolated from the bulk of the populist shit out there by an ever-increasing percentage. And I'm not sure how much the best recent designers, like Cole Weller, really owe to Eric Lang.
Yeah, baby, maybe don't quit your day.
No, I was thinking about going back to it, to be honest.
Yeah.
So yeah, he thinks that the inevitable sort of Kickstarterification leads to blandness. Do you think that's the case? It is actually counterintuitive to what a lot of people say about Kickstarter, that it promotes innovation.
I think he's half right, even though his main argument seems to be very elitist in a way that doesn't sit well with me.
Well, he's part of the elite, old rocket surgeon.
Obviously, yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's maybe a tongue-in-cheek comment, a tone to the whole thing, though I'm not quite sure in whose cheek. But, yeah, I think, yeah, again, there is a risk that we will see a lot of beige again. We will see a lot of games just borrowing some mechanics that are deemed the new hotness and just, cobbled together and push out the door in the hopes.
But we see that anyway, right?
We see that anyway. We see that already.
We see Dominion give birth to 1,000 deck-building games, 1% of which are great.
Yeah, and occasionally now we've actually moved past the point where deck building isn't the only mechanic, just one of many, and which I think is the biggest and best influence Dominion has had. No, actually, I don't think that's as much of a. I think it comes down to this whole half full, the glass of water being half full or half empty. Basically, you can look at more and more games coming out and focusing on the fact that an even bigger number of them will be not to your liking, will be disappointing, even will be hyped for a few months and then quickly forgotten.
But that's the sign of a healthy industry, it seems to me. I don't think that's anything to decry. Not liking everything is a human prerogative and assertion of one's identity, and that's also fine.
Yeah, I think the point that that is worthy of criticism, though, is the idea of games having increasingly shorter shelf lives. The idea that you kind of see that with the Kickstarter.
Is that because games are worse, or there are just more games to distract people's attention?
I think the culture that's been created around Kickstarter games, the hype while the funding campaign is still going on, then the wait where the game isn't out yet, and then the game comes out and there's this huge hype that returns if the game is any good. The examples being, of course, something like Scythe, something like
Blood Rage,
Rising Sun. I am going to assume will have a similar excitement curve. Everyone's excited about Rising Sun. Kickstarter's over. We're waiting for the game to actually show up. Then we'll see another explosion of comments about it. But I noticed this with Scythe now after a few months where the people who were excited about this, loved the game and played it, stopped talking about loving and playing it. I assume they still love it. They might still play it. They just don't talk about it. I see more comments sort of, like you said, asserting their individuality, but saying, yeah, I wasn't that impressed by it. That wasn't that.
But people like to swim against the tides, right?
It's not just that. I mean, I think...
And maybe they're justified in it. Too.
Yeah, I think there is... But again, you do see a strong... I think the pendulum swings a bit too far to either side right now, especially with Kickstarter games. You have these huge Kickstarter games like the second printing of Gloomhaven, where everyone is out of their mind about this game. Obviously, at some point, I can't help myself either. At some point, you go, this has gone beyond people being passionate about a game and way into hyping each other up. And you do kind of feel like, yeah, calm down, it's a game.
Well, the hobby becomes more than the thing. It becomes being part of a group, and that's all part of it.
Right.
Anyway, Georgios.
Yes?
I'm starting to get nappy rash.
Nappy rash?
Well, rolling around in my own facies.
Yeah, your pronunciation is amazing.
And, I don't want Janine, she's coming round in a minute, and I don't want her to see me covered in my own chocolate, Georgios. So,
does she know that we switched the comment on this transition thing? Did you tell her?
I assume she wasn't aware of the procedure. She was busy.
Well, we talked about it for a moment. I mean, before I came here last time.
Who? What? You? What?
Yeah. I mean, she might be coming under, she might be expecting something else when she comes in here.
Well, I bloody hope not, Georgios. And if she does, I'm holding you accountable.
I can get you a wig if you want.
Say goodnight, Georgios.
Blonde or brown?
It's crass, unsophisticated, and emotionally manipulative.
It's this week's review.
Welcome to another show of the Japanese sensation that is sweeping the nation. Yes, it's once again time for the Unicornus Knights to ride into action. Today, Episode 4, A New Hope. It is a period of civil war. Imperial troops have driven the rebel forces from the castle and pursued them across the kingdom. The attack was devastating, but luckily one member of the royal family managed to escape and gather her loyal forces. Princess Cordelia now has but one goal: revenge. Repel the Emperor, reclaim the throne, and free the people of Astoria. It is up to you to help her succeed in this. As a motley crew of warriors, generals, tactical advisors, you've banded together to lend your support, your military strength, and influence to rally the people around the once proud flag of Astoria. As the enemy hordes attempt to stamp out the last remnants of the rebel forces, you will draw them away from the princess and snare them in skirmishes so that Princess Cordelia can fulfill her promise. This is the last stand of Astoria. You shall fight the Empire on the beaches, you shall fight on the fields, and you shall fight in the mountains. History will remember you and your sacrifices as the Battle of the Unicornus Knights.
Yeah. Skip to the end.
It's the one sentence review.
Unicornus Knights is a rollicking, rambunctious game that prioritizes the communication between players over the simple manipulation of pieces.
Its volume might overwhelm you. Its rules may surprise you, but it is the stories that Unicornus Knights tells that will win you over.
Georgios? What's that in the corner of the room?
I don't know, but it's eating peanuts with its nose.
I've got a question for you, Georgios.
You had a lot of them. Go on.
Is this a baby elephant that's perfectly formed and looking all nice and shapely, or has someone stuck a bicycle pump up its bum and pumped it up so it's big, but it's mostly full of air?
Are you asking me whether this is a small game or in a big box, or a big game in an adequate box?
That's what I'm asking. So the elephant we've decided to go for in this is that, Japanese designers are famous for their little, intricate, beautiful games that are simple yet very satisfying. And this is a big box game from, two of the heavyweights in Japanese game design. And have they managed to size up, or is this just a small game with lots of components?
It has lots of components. That is true. It has maybe a few too many components, or components that could have been
done in different ways, more elegant ways.
More elegant ways. Yeah, I think there were two surprises when I played this game. One of them was that it's not quite as elegant as Seiji Kanai's games I'm used to. But we have played, I believe, Kuro's other game, one other game by him, called The Ravens of Three Sahashri.
That's right. Which
is not an elegant game. It is quite convoluted, and it takes a while to wrap your head around.
But incredibly interesting.
It is fantastic. We have a review somewhere, look it up on our archives if you are interested. And I think component-wise and complexity-wise, seems to me this was more on that designer, on Kuro, because there are fairly intricate ways of dealing with things. And on the other hand, you have certain very, very elegant, simple ways of introducing other things into the overall game. So what it comes down to, I would side with this game actually being appropriate for its size. It is actually a game that is as deep or heavy, or whatever you want to call it, as the box suggests. It's not an oink game, which are super tiny, fantastic as they may be. It is not a typical micro game in the vein of Lost Legacy or Love Letter. But it is a fairly decent sized game. It takes about quite a bit of table space, and I don't think any of that is really wasted. I think it's a proper big game from two designers who are not known for proper big games.
Yeah, this game is, I don't know whether it's a myth, because I don't know the Japanese gaming scene. I only know the Japanese gaming scene through the prism of Europe, right? And so you have to bear in mind these are guys bringing things over on aeroplanes. So size is a premium. Right?
Yeah.
So maybe all the big box games get left in Japan and don't come over here. I don't know whether that's the case or not. But I've noticed the last two Essens, you get to the Japan brand stand and there are more and more standard Ticket to Ride size boxes, right? More standard, bigger games. And this is probably one of the first I've played. I love the Japan brand games. I love that they're so small and interesting. But this game absolutely feels like it fills the box that it fills.
Yeah.
And this game is surprising in many ways to me, because it's actually very simple. Its rules are very easy. It flows for me very nicely, but it feels like, more than anything, a tactical combat game.
Right, yeah.
This is a game in which you resolve amongst yourself. So basically, What you're trying to do is there's a princess who's trying to get to a castle. If she can get to the castle, you win the game. She has an AI. And what your job is to keep the enemies away from her so she can go and defeat the nasty villain in the castle at the end. And if you manage to get her there, she defeats the nasty villain and then we all win. So much is determined by board position on this game and proximity of certain characters to certain other characters, proximity of goodies to baddies. And the moving of the pieces is just the resolution of the talk over the table. And that I find really interesting is that it doesn't feel like a sort of adventure game. It doesn't feel like a dungeon crawler. It's a co-op game. It doesn't feel like a sort of pandemic-y thing. It feels much more like a tactical combat game to me.
Right.
Do you see that?
I have to admit, I'm not entirely sure what kind of game, tactical combat game, the term conjures up in my head. I guess so. Yeah, a lot of his positioning, I agree. The co-op mechanics are fairly simple and small. They're not central as in other games. It's all about positioning. It's all about planning. And then you have random chance coming up the works. And I think ultimately these elements that all make up this game have as much space as they need to have. They aren't, with the exception maybe of the enemy armies, which are these cardboard chits that are double-sided with different values on them, and they're occasionally hard to read because they just stack them up and it just becomes a bit messy. With the exception of that, most of it is fairly elegant, most of it is fairly straightforward, and none of it feels like it's eating up space for the sake of eating up space.
No, I mean, what I mean by tactical combat is I mean that you have to react through combat to situations that arise.
Right, yeah.
And your consideration is not maintaining resources, although that's an aspect. Your consideration is not collecting sets of things to allow you to trigger things. Your consideration is making sure your guys are in the right position to shield, making sure your guys are in the right position to be able to deflect potential attacks. And also the concept of glorious death is rife in this game. Sacrificing your character to the greater good is part of that, and it's all determined through combat, and that I found surprising and an incredible amount of enjoyment.
Oh yeah, no. Well, for personal reasons, I take issue with the term glorious death. Let's call it sacrifice. I think I would agree with sacrifice. It's the idea of
we're thinking of the same thing. We're just using different words, right?
Yeah. But you know, it's all built around this idea of sacrifice. Yeah. And I find that very, very interesting. I find that very essential to the game experience. I find it very essential to how the conversations go and what happens as you try to plot out how to reach your objective, which is, you know, keep the princess alive long enough so she can move back into the castle.
So, what did you think of my interactive, candid photo montage?
Well, it was certainly an experience.
Okay, so when I went round to Georgios's house because he bought this at Essen, and I saw the game set up.
Right.
And I thought, bloody hell. There's millions of chits. There's loads of characters and permutations. There's loads of enemies you can fight. There's these weird shaped boards that have these intricate drawings on them.
Right.
And there's loads of icons and things. And you just think, and I thought, my God, this is going to be tremendously unwieldy and fiddly and difficult to deal with. And I was really surprised that actually once you get it, it's very elegant and very simple and easy to wrap your head around.
To be fair though, just a small detail, some of the icons, in the edition I have at least, are hard to read because they're just the graphic design didn't do their homework. As far as I know, the AAG release coming out this year, We'll keep the graphics, but they have slightly reworked the icons, so they're hopefully easier to read.
I mean, this sounds a really stupid thing to say, but it's very Japanese, right?
All right. Yeah.
The way the art is rendered is sort of classic, sort of manga-looking characters. And it's sort of medieval, the medieval world shot through a Japanese prism.
Yeah.
And that's really interesting. And the names of I don't know whether it's sort of poor translation or just that's the way they decided to do it, but the names are very evocative.
Yeah.
And there is a sort of otherworldliness that I find incredibly attractive to this game.
It is interesting because I do think there's a certain exoticness to the Japanese. I assume there's a certain exoticness to the Japanese when they look at typical European names.
Yeah.
Like, I believe the princess is called Cordelia, which is literally not a name I would have expected in a board game.
Right.
It's, you have a lot of other names in board games, in Europe and in the US, but Cordelia is not the first that comes to mind. It's Anne or Susan or, I don't know, Sarah maybe.
Regan.
Oh yeah, it's a good show. So this is interesting. I agree. This is sort of, it feels slightly shifted. It's like just tiny bit off, but not enough to be odd. It's just, amusing and appealing in a way that benefits the experience as opposed to taking away from
it's sort of a different culture reflecting on your culture.
Yeah.
And you sort of get an insight how they see us, which is interesting.
Yeah, exactly. So that's really quite interesting. But one of the most engaging things about this game to me is the way that you're giving an objective, a task to fulfill. And as you play the game, you realize that not only is it difficult, which is quite common for co-op games, it also is almost inevitable that you need to sacrifice your character at some point.
Okay, I have a question for you on this. Do you think that is a cultural decision made by the designers?
I don't know if it's a conscious decision or if it's a type of background or whatever, but I do notice that, I feel that all great cooperative games right now suggest the idea of sacrificing the individual, not the individual, but certain elements that an individual player is in control of for the greater good. The idea that this is something we're all working together to fulfill. So some of us might need to give up certain things. You don't really have it in, say, Pandemic, interestingly enough.
Well, Pandemic is really, without wanting to sound too pretentious, but Pandemic seems to me ethically a sort of vindication of Western individualism, right?
Oh, yeah.
That we succeed through our own individual skill brought together.
Yeah, but I'm thinking, for example, I'm reminded of something like Shadows of Camelot.
Right.
Where one of the central mechanics is literally sacrifice. Lose health points to avoid something bad happening in the game, advancing you losing the game. So basically, you need to sacrifice a bit your health. So the evil, I don't know what the villains are called in Shadows of Camelot, but so that evil doesn't win.
Right.
And this is sort of pushed to the foreground in Unicornus Knights.
In what way? Can you explain it briefly?
The empire that you're fighting, the armies that you're fighting are stronger than you are, full stop. They are stronger. If they move together, if they move, the units together, they will definitely overwhelm you. So your tactical maneuvering has a lot to do with keeping those enemy forces split so they don't merge and don't become these steamrollers of power. But also, as far as I remember, it's very, very rare that you regain hit points. So basically every combat you go into that's dice-based, that will lead to losses as often as it will lead to victories, will see you, weaker and weaker each turn. And, in some cases, in the last game we played, it was obvious that two of our characters, and you can swap them out once they've been removed from the game. You can take another one. two of the characters would not survive the game. And the fact that the game is so not obvious, but it doesn't...
Well, not only not survive the game, but you're almost kind of incentivized to sacrifice them, right?
Yeah, because this is not about you personally winning. This is not about you getting your character from beginning to end, because this gets you nothing. The only thing that matters is that a princess returns to the castle.
And as this differs from Pandemic, right?
Right.
Which seems sort of very American in its conception of the individual, is that if someone dies... Am I talking out of my ass now?
I don't know.
No.
Actually, no.
Forget that. Carry on.
Well, I'm confused. So, yeah. So the interesting thing is what it does is, at least the games I've played, it does slightly shift your mental attention to what happens. All of a sudden, you are this brother/sisterhood of players who will have to suffer, who will have to sacrifice their characters because there's something bigger than themselves that they're working towards. And since I'm a huge fan of games putting us into new and different ways of relating to one another, and this sort of shared bond of sacrificing together so we can achieve victory, so we can restore peace in this kingdom. I find this refreshing and interesting. I wouldn't go too far, so far as to say this is, somehow fitting my politics or anything, but, I don't think it does. But I like this idea. I like this idea of this game setting up something that I don't get from other games. In other games, in other co-op games, I never feel like we're sacrificing something together. We're all solving a puzzle together. Yes. We're trying to optimize our movements. Yes. We are occasionally, shifting responsibilities for certain tasks from one player to another. Yes, but I don't think I have a co-op game in my collection where I'm asked to sacrifice, where I'm asked to go into a battle that I know I cannot win. But if I do this, if I stand there and let them attack me, I can buy time for whoever wants to for the princess to reach the castle. And this is amazing to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think co-op games live or die by how much players talk to each other during playing them, right? That's the whole USP of them. That's where they live, is that it all lives above the table. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. You talk, you get a plan, you come together, then you move the pieces. Right. And the moving the pieces is almost unimportant to the experience of the game.
Yeah.
And it's interesting I think this is kind of why Pandemic Legacy works so well in many ways too. Because these little acts of naming your characters, mm-hmm. these little inevitabilities of, I don't think I'm giving away anything here. If there's an outbreak in an area and your character's in that area, you get scars that damage you. And if you get a certain amount, the character will die. Mm-hmm. And that's what Pandemic Legacy is trying to do too, I think. And there's a movement, it seems to me, of trying to get players to identify with their characters, but also enjoy, in this sense counterintuitive, enjoy the sacrifice of losing them to a greater cause. I don't get it.
What?
Why does everyone reckon that indigenous people are so much better at telling stories?
It's narrative, you idiot.
This game is designed very simply, and I don't think there's much mileage in us discussing moving things and rolling dice, right?
Yeah, I think they're not... Well, there's one thing that might be interesting that I didn't mention earlier, but feeds into this narrative section now, so yeah, go ahead.
That's why we've decided what is a better section to discuss, what we have more mileage, is narrative, is what the game gives us in terms of the story.
Right.
And so, what do you want to say about that?
Well, let's start with shallow waters first. One of the most potent elements and most interesting elements how narrative is injected into this game are the fate cards. Fate cards work basically like this. You, when certain conditions are met, when you move next to an enemy character for the first time, you draw a fate card, and this fate card defines the relationship between you and the enemy character. This can be something very bland, like a loyal soldier with no effect at all, But it can also be things like long-lost siblings, or love at first sight, or rivalry, or other elements. And some of these cards, admittedly, are very dull. Like, the enemy has set a trap and you lose them, and you lose health points. But cards like love at first sight, where after the fight is concluded, if you defeat the enemy, they will join your side. They become allies to you. This is fascinating, because what happens now is we have these small, I will call them time bombs of narrative depth that the game injects. It's a very tiny, very elegant mechanic. And all of a sudden you have these small pockets of narrative content that you can use to rearrange in your head to tell the story of the game you're playing. So, for example, let's say I'm moving out with my cat burglar bandits, and I'm moving out next to an enemy, and then I draw a fake card and it's love at first sight. So all of a sudden we have the situation where we fight each other. When the fight is over, realize actually we care about one another, and they join our side. And it's just these small moments. And even though I've played a bunch of times now, it never feels repetitive. It still feels like there's this amazing moment where, having gone through all this sacrifice before, or even after this moment, you have these small stories popping up in your head of how they met each other on the battlefield. They fell in love, and then she died.
That's it. Because and that's why I think this game really lives, in that it has an overarching narrative and an overarching idea, but they keep dropping these narrative bombs. They keep giving you a different perspective. And I think part of that, if you couple that with this idea that you inevitably are going to sacrifice a character, or a character is going to be sacrificed, whether it be yours or not, adds to the pathos of playing the game.
Yes, that's it. Pathos. Excellent.
And that is really rewarding. Mm-hmm. And essentially what you're doing is you're moving, you're drawing a couple of cards, and you're rolling dice. And the alchemy that they've managed to create with this is really almost genius, I think.
Definitely. But I want to move on to this other point, because those of us who've been following us for a while might remember our Essen show, or the Essen videos, where I also talked about this game. And one of the points that I liked about this game was the idea that you are helping a female character. You are pushing, you are in service of a female character. You're not, strong knights fighting to free the country and free the princess. No, you are serving the princess. You are supporting the princess. You're sacrificing yourself for the princess. And I have kind of slightly moved from that original perspective on this game. But I stumbled over something very interesting. So let me expand what I mean. The depiction of male characters and female characters in this game is interesting, because there are different body types. There's one, let's call her very voluptuous character. Quite a few very voluptuous and tightly skinned, and tiny bras and what have you. It's not quite as awful as Tanto Cuore.
You mean voluptuous in the sense of, you don't mean fat. You mean
no.
You mean sexy.
Yes, there are quite a few, not necessarily eroticized, but at least very attractive, and there's certain allure to some of these drawings. Interesting enough, the princess is fully clad in armor. She's not walking around in a chainmail bikini or something like that. But then again, another character, the cat burglar bandits from the hills. There's quite literally there's this main female character he seems to be wearing a bra made out of one string.
Right.
There are other characters that are equally, barely clad. There are very, very attractive looking men, of course. And there's, I think, at least one character who is a very, there's no other way to put it, fat woman.
Yeah.
And it started thinking, and it got me thinking about this depiction of genders in a game, but more, but when seen in light of all the narrative depth the game provides otherwise, it led me to this conclusion that games, unlike most other narrative media, do not provide you with a fixed narrative. They provide you with narrative pockets. They provide you with these elements that you rearrange. So
that's how they differ from books and films.
Yes,
right?
Exactly. And what happens basically is that I think, and I'm sure people are going to disagree with it, but with this game, I do feel that way. It is in your hand whether the story you tell is one of sexualized female characters for the enjoyment of the male players, or whether this is a heartfelt, pathos-driven story of attractive characters. They're all kind of attractive because it is a fantasy after all, where the sexuality, the attractive, the sexual allure of these characters is simply irrelevant. But it's all about allegiance, loyalty, and sacrifice.
Well, this is the point. I think why Tanto Cuore is problematic is because
it's sexist. It's not problematic.
Every woman is rendered not only as hugely voluptuous and busty and sexy, but also incredibly submissive.
Yeah.
And simply there for the manipulation of the male player. Right. Whereas this is not the case in this.
No.
Some of the women are scantily clad. Most of the women have agency, and not just agency, but their own agency. The princess will move whether you bloody want her to or not. Yes. There's no controlling of her. She is the main agent in this. She has the action and everything revolves around her. And this isn't, some dungaree wearing woman who hates all men. That doesn't even come into it. You just have a character who happens to be female, who has a strong will, and they will see that will through for the good of everyone else. And it is your job to ensure that good wins. It's just good happens to have a female face here. Yeah. I think that's hugely positive, no?
Yeah, I think I do see, again, because of the instability of narrative in board games, I can see the argument that somebody could sit down and turn this into a Tanto Cuore style game for the heavy gamer. I think it's a very cynical, or at least a very uncharitable view, but I can't discount it. Of course. I mean, I don't know. There might be people who will only take the female characters just to look at them and slabber all them at them. I don't know. There might be. I honestly don't know. But when I played this game, it never felt like these female characters existed for me to be aroused by them or sort of have naughty thoughts or anything like that. Or even if you ignore that, they were never there for my entertainment. They were never there. They were never objects for me to be amused by. These are characters that I am. These are characters I play. These
that
are
have an equal role within the narrative unfurling within the game. And none of that is diminished by what sex they are.
Yeah. And also, again, and I think the only murky part is literally whether you're fine with scantily clad women in a game or not. And I think there's room to fall on either side, but I strongly believe, and I strongly stand by this, that the game is not diminished by the fact that some female characters are scantily clad.
So, Giorgio, should people go out and buy this game? Unicornus Knights, the Knights of the Single Horn.
That's naughty. Yes, I think it's a good game. I think it's a interesting game. It's an engaging game. I mean, we were very excited about the narrative depth of the game. We're very excited about this being a game where it's all about sacrifice. I think, like I said, I like my games to differ because of this, of the experience they offer. And I think this game does offer a unique experience, a unique cooperative experience that I have not seen other games offer. Maybe Shadows over Camelot, but even there, you don't have quite, in Shadows over Camelot, you don't have quite the gaming depth as you do in Unicornus Knights. It's a really, really good game. And, I don't know how much and if AEG will change too much about the game. I hope they actually reprint the stories, the background, the backstories of the individual characters, because they are again amazing. Even though they're kind of like you said, there's this weird fantasy idea. I remember somebody on the Board Game Geek forums was kind enough to translate them from the Japanese into English, because for some reason this translation didn't show up in the translated rulebook. And they're great. I think that they are silly and they are odd and they're typically pure fantasy style backstories of characters you would expect, but something about them is just fantastic. Like the half dragon, the last of his kind who just wants revenge, or the of the young leader, the female leader of the knights, who is sworn to protect the princess at all costs and feels like she has to redeem herself because she couldn't keep the evil emperor from taking the castle. It's amazing. It's all these little stories full of pathos, and they're fun. They're just simple fun. Again, awful as it is, I enjoyed them because they made me feel something, and that's good.
Yeah, this game tells wonderful stories. This game is interesting and quirky and different, and isn't generic fantasy as shot through medieval Europeanness, as so many games that come out are. This is truly quirky, truly interesting. If you have daughters, I assume that this shows a real great example of strong femininity overcoming something. But regardless of all of those points over the top, regardless of anything that is political or social, this is a really good, crunchy, fun, tactical combat game that I would recommend anyone play and anyone can extract enjoyment out of. I'm not sitting on the dock of a bay, Georgios, watching the tide roll away. I'm not sitting on the dock of a bay, and hopefully I'm not always wasting time. But if I was watching the tide roll away, Georgios, how would people contact me? And you?
They can go to our website, which is infoperfected.com. They can write us an email, which is infoperfected@gmail.com. They can find us on Twitter @infoperfected and @perfectedinfo. There's Instagram, Perfect Information. There's Facebook, Perfect Information Podcast, I believe. And then there's the Board Game Geek Guild, which is the Guild of Perfect Information, number 2348.
I always get that number correct.
Yes, always.
And in the next week, the next 2 weeks, absolute maximum, we're going to start our Patreon campaign.
We'll see.
We're going to start our Patreon campaign, and then you'll be able to support us. We'll offer you lots of really cool stuff that'll help you get more into the Perfect Information community.
Xmunity, yes.
But if you don't want to give us money, tell your friends about us. Go on Reddit, go on Facebook, go on BGG.
Maybe not 4chan.
I mean, they're anonymous from 4chan. They were all right, weren't they?
No.
Go places where people talk about these things and talk about us. And invite us on your podcast if you've got one. And if you're a game publisher who listens to this and you like the reviews we do, write us at infoperfected@gmail.com. Talk to us. We can review your game. Fundamentally, what we want to do is we want to get out there and provide the smartest board game content on the internet.
Well, I don't think we can do that.
That's what we want to do, Georgios.
Yeah.
Want is the operative word.
No.
Georgios, I've got aspirations, Georgios. I've got aspirations. Don't piss on my parade.
I won't. Well, maybe not the smartest, but at least the one where we recognize both voices.
I don't mean intelligent, Georgios. I mean we just wear suits when we record.
Ah. Well, I don't want to wear stuff when we record. It's constricting.
But you look so good in a suit. You look so sexy.
Yes, that's
the way those dress trousers hug your buttocks.
I'm still not quite sure whether that whole transition thing worked the way it was supposed to.
Say goodnight, Georgios.
No, I'm going to talk to the doctor.